The December sky shimmered like frosted glass above a quiet Christmas tree farm nestled just outside Ashland, Oregon. A soft blanket of snow coated the pine branches while festive carols floated from speakers hidden among wreaths and garlands. Celeste Monroe, wrapped in a red wool scarf and oversized navy pea coat, crouched down near the end of row 7, calming a lost little boy who was crying near a Douglas fir. Her gentle voice, like honey stirred into warm tea, calmed the child as she offered him a peppermint stick in her gloved hand. Across the field, Landon Whitaker, tall, charismatic, and somewhat out of place in a sleek gray overcoat and leather gloves, spotted the boy and rushed over, his phone still open with a lost child post he had just uploaded. Their hands met on the boy's shoulders, and when their eyes locked, time stilled. The boy sniffled, then smiled, sensing the calm between the two adults. That day, what started as a coincidence would quietly carve the beginning of an extraordinary story. Celeste found herself laughing awkwardly, brushing snow off her jeans as Landon introduced himself, grateful for her calm instincts and kindness. They chatted for 15 minutes before the boy's mother arrived, frantic but thankful, and while snowflakes fell around them, Landon asked Celeste if she might want to grab a coffee sometime. She almost declined, but something about his voice, sincere, a bit weathered, made her say yes. Celeste Monroe had always been a gentle soul, the kind of woman who preferred ink journals to phone screens, indie music to club beats, and one-on-one conversations to crowds. She'd grown up in a fractured home, a father who left when she was 6, and a mother who bounced between highs and lows, love and bitterness. Celeste learned early to nurture others, often at the expense of herself. Teaching literature at a local high school had been her escape, a world where words made sense and characters followed arcs that led to hope. She had no desire for fame, no rush to be swept off her feet. Yet Landon, with his curious mix of ambition and warmth, tugged at something dormant in her. Their first date, at a corner bookstore cafe in town, lasted 3 hours. He talked about real estate like it was the spine of a story, each property a new chapter, each negotiation a test of character. But what intrigued her most was the sorrow beneath his charm. Landon had been raised by a widowed father who buried grief in work. Though well-dressed and well-spoken, Landon had been a lonely child, one who learned to mask pain behind success and smiles. The two found comfort in each other's pain, drawn together not just by attraction but by mutual understanding of emotional absence. Over the next 8 months, Celeste and Landon became inseparable. They took weekend trips to the coast, cooked experimental dinners that sometimes went hilariously wrong, and swapped stories of childhood over wine-stained postcards and scribbled bucket lists. Celeste told him she once dreamed of moving to Maine and opening a used bookstore with a poetry corner. Landon confessed he wanted to leave behind flipping suburban homes and build sustainable luxury resorts in underdeveloped landscapes across the country. They supported each other fiercely, Celeste encouraging Landon to start his own firm, Landon helping Celeste navigate grief when her estranged mother passed unexpectedly. His best friend, Graham Miles, a finance consultant with a cynical streak, warned Landon that love could distract him. Meanwhile, Celeste's younger sister Ava, a single mother and fierce protector, cautiously approved of Landon but remained watchful. The couple weren't perfect, but their bond was sincere, growing with each shared joy and vulnerability. When Landon gave Celeste a locket with a tiny evergreen inside it, whispering, "This is the tree where I found you," she cried for the first time in years, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming belief that maybe, just maybe, love could be safe this time. But while promises were whispered under stars and winter moons, fate had already begun laying the stones for a road they never expected to walk. Celeste Monroe rarely spoke about her parents. Even in her closest circles, she downplayed their absence with phrases like, "It was just complicated," or "They tried, I guess." But the truth was darker. Her father, Douglas Monroe, had walked out when Celeste was 6, leaving behind a trail of unpaid bills and a wedding ring on the kitchen counter. Her mother, Lisbeth, had spiraled into instability, not drugs or violence, but something more subtle and insidious. She would cry for hours and then act like nothing happened, telling Celeste stories about fairy tale marriages while ignoring the gnawing silence of a house without love. Celeste learned not to trust the highs, because lows always followed. In high school, she clung to books and journaling, her only stable refuge. As she and Landon grew closer, she feared that the weight of her past would stain the purity of what they had. One rainy afternoon, wrapped in a fleece blanket and sipping tea, she finally told Landon about her father's last letter, a generic apology card signed with only a D. Landon listened, silent, but attentive. He didn't interrupt, didn't pity her. He simply leaned forward and whispered, "You didn't deserve that." That single sentence undid something inside her, and that night, she knew she loved him. But Landon Whitaker wasn't without ghosts of his own. Raised in Sacramento, he was the only child of Russell Whitaker, a steel-jawed construction executive who lost his wife, Eleanor, to a tragic hiking accident when Landon was 11. Russell never remarried, never cried, at least not in front of Landon. He ran his household like a project site, efficient, demanding, and silent. Landon quickly learned that feelings had no place in a man's world. His rebellion came in the form of ambition. He poured himself into academics, sports, and eventually real estate, chasing success like a lifeline. But beneath the tailored suits and confident pitches was a boy who still woke from dreams of his mother calling his name from the cliffs. What he never told Celeste, not fully, was that during college, he had been deeply entangled with a woman named Sloane Keller. Sloane was captivating, bold, intuitive, and dangerously manipulative. Their relationship had burned fast and ended in a storm of betrayal, with Landon discovering she'd been embezzling money from his first startup pitch. He never reported her, too ashamed of his naivety. Instead, he buried it, determined never to fall for chaos again. But he didn't tell Celeste that part. He told her they just weren't right for each other, brushing it off. She sensed he wasn't being entirely transparent, but she didn't press. At the time, love made her trust silence too easily. Months passed, and with their bond deepening, Landon began planning something meaningful. It was January when he booked a secluded cabin in the Three Sisters Mountains, intending to surprise Celeste with a weekend away. She thought they were just hiking to escape their busy schedules, but as they reached the summit, snow crunching under their boots, wind biting at their cheeks, Landon pulled out a ring. No crowd. No photographers. Just wind, trees, and two hearts pulsing in sync. "Celeste Monroe," he said, voice trembling despite his practiced confidence, "you make the world feel gentle. Will you be the calm to my chaos forever?" Tears spilled from Celeste's eyes as she nodded, whispering yes over and over. They descended the mountain engaged, the world below unaware that two broken souls had just promised to piece each other whole. Yet as the sun dipped below the trees, casting long shadows over the snow, neither of them noticed the dark footprints trailing behind, footprints from a past that wasn't finished with them yet. The vineyard smelled like promise. Rows of amber-lit lanterns hung between oak trees, and the twilight sun painted the sky in a soft lavender haze. The wedding was intimate, exactly how Celeste had dreamed, not grand, but sacred. 35 guests, seated beneath grapevine arches, watched as Landon stood in a navy suit with his heart open, waiting. Celeste wore a simple lace gown with her mother's antique bracelet fastened around her wrist, the one family heirloom she hadn't sold when things got hard. Ava stood beside her, holding back tears and scanning Landon with cautious eyes, while Graham leaned against a cedar beam, amused and supportive. Danielle, Celeste's cousin from Portland, arrived last minute in silver heels and curiosity. She hugged Celeste tightly but whispered in her ear, "Are you sure? He's handsome, but there's something unreadable about him." Celeste smiled it off. Everyone's nerves came with weddings, right? She chose to believe in Landon, in their quiet beginnings. As they exchanged handwritten vows under a canopy of hanging lights and soft violin music, even the air seemed to hold its breath. The reception was held on the same property, inside a rustic wine cellar repurposed into a banquet room. It had been Ava's idea to skip traditional wedding halls in favor of something meaningful. Wine flowed freely, laughter bounced off stone walls, and for once, Celeste felt the weight of her past lift. Landon gave a brief speech, confident, charming, thanking their guests, especially the woman who made me believe that not all storms are meant to destroy. Celeste's chest fluttered at the words, until midway through the toast, his phone buzzed loudly against the glass table. Landon fumbled, silenced it quickly, but Celeste caught the flicker of something behind his eyes. He excused himself moments later and didn't return for 20 minutes. Danielle, ever observant, leaned over and murmured, "Phones don't ring like that unless someone's trying to be noticed." Celeste brushed it off, again. But later, as Landon joined her for their first dance, she noticed he was distant, eyes drifting once toward the bar where Graham was speaking with someone she didn't recognize, a tall woman with ash-blonde hair, her back turned. The moment passed. But it stayed with Celeste like a shadow on satin. That night, as they drove to the cliffside lodge booked for their honeymoon weekend, Celeste turned to Landon and asked who had called during the toast. He hesitated, then laughed nervously. "Spam. Probably another real estate deal falling through," he said, waving it off. Celeste let it go, not because she believed him, but because she wanted to. She remembered how her mother used to invent lies just to keep her world from falling apart, and a part of her feared she was doing the same. At the lodge, everything was perfect, a fireplace lit, petals on the bed, chocolate-dipped strawberries on silver trays. Yet, as they toasted champagne glasses, a flicker of distance pulsed behind Landon's eyes. Later that night, when he fell asleep quickly beside her, she lay awake staring at the ceiling beams, trying to convince herself that the twinge she felt in her gut was simply nerves, not a warning. Outside, the wind howled softly against the windowpane, like whispers too faint to understand, but too loud to ignore. 2 months after the wedding, Celeste and Landon relocated to Seattle, a move he pitched as the next logical chapter in their growing future. Landon had been offered a senior development role at Belridge Urban Estates, a prestigious firm known for luxury property deals and aggressive investment projects. Celeste, hesitant but supportive, packed up their Ashland apartment and left behind her teaching position. "We'll plant new roots," Landon promised as they drove through the city skyline, their car weaving past gleaming high-rises and waterfront condos. The excitement of starting anew fizzled quickly when Celeste realized just how isolating the transition would be. The new condo overlooked Puget Sound, sleek and modern, but cold and too quiet. She applied for several teaching jobs in the area but received no callbacks. For the first time in their relationship, the long afternoon stretched, heavy and unspoken. Landon would leave at 6:30 a.m. and not return until well past 9 p.m., often muttering about late meetings, zoning issues, or demanding clients. She told herself it was temporary, that he was simply trying to secure their future. But loneliness has a sound, and in that apartment, it echoed. Celeste tried to create rhythm in the silence. She joined a local book club at the neighborhood community center, where she met a few women her age, friendly, but surface level. None of them had time for coffee, and most were married to equally absent husbands. She began grocery shopping in small amounts just to have a reason to walk the aisles. On Wednesdays, she visited the local arboretum, sketching trees into her journal beside handwritten reflections about the life she thought she'd have. Her sister Ava called often, offering long-distance comfort and occasional jokes about online teaching platforms she should consider. But what Ava couldn't sense over the phone was how the vibrant, steady Celeste had begun to flicker. One night, after a quiet dinner of leftover chicken stir-fry, Celeste asked Landon if they could plan a weekend together, just the two of them. He nodded but never looked up from his laptop. "We'll see. This quarter's packed," he muttered. She nodded, watching him from across the granite kitchen island as he scrolled through spreadsheets and investor portfolios, and felt, for the first time, like a stranger in her own marriage. Then came the late-night calls, muffled, whispered, when Landon would step out onto the balcony, claiming he didn't want to wake her. The calls weren't every night, but frequent enough to feel suspicious. One Saturday morning, Celeste decided to surprise him at his office with lunch. She prepared his favorite, a turkey pesto wrap, sweet potato chips, and mint iced tea, and took a cab downtown. When she arrived at Belridge's glass building, the receptionist smiled politely and said, "Mr. Whitaker isn't in today. He left after breakfast with a client. Said he had off-site meetings all day." Confused, Celeste returned home. She didn't confront him that night, or the next. Instead, she started documenting little things: a new cologne she hadn't seen before, a receipt in his jacket pocket from a boutique hotel, a faint lipstick stain once found on the inside collar of a dress shirt he claimed hadn't been worn. Still, she said nothing. The part of her that wanted to believe still held on. But faith, when bruised too many times, begins to limp, and Celeste was starting to feel that limp with every passing day. The emotional silence between Celeste and Landon grew louder with each passing week. Though they shared a bed, their lives were orbiting different stars. Celeste would wake to cold sheets and fall asleep to the blue glow of Landon's phone screen. They barely spoke beyond updates, rent, groceries, calls missed, and even those were brief. One Thursday evening, after finishing another lonely dinner, Celeste received a text from Ava. "You okay? You've gone quiet again." She didn't reply. Instead, she sat on the living room couch and scrolled through old photos of their engagement trip, wondering how something so sincere had begun to feel so hollow. That same night, Landon came home smelling of a sharp new fragrance, not Celeste's lavender or citrus mist, but something darker, heady. She asked about it lightly. "New cologne." "Office gift," he said too quickly, peeling off his blazer and heading to the shower. She sat in silence, noticing how the air around her suddenly felt heavier, like something unspoken had taken root. It wasn't long before a name resurfaced, one Celeste had only heard in passing. Sloan Keller. Her name appeared first in a forwarded email thread from Landon's office regarding upcoming corporate restructuring. "Please loop in Sloan," one manager had written. Celeste paused when she saw the name. She recalled it vaguely from a conversation back during their engagement, a colleague from Landon's past who had moved on to another firm. Now, she was back, newly hired as Belridge's senior marketing executive. Celeste mentioned it at dinner. "Didn't you say she left the company?" Landon shrugged. "They rehired her. I had no say in it." But Celeste noticed how he refused to meet her eyes. A few days later, while doing laundry, she found a business card tucked inside Landon's blazer pocket. It wasn't just Sloan's, it was personalized, handwritten on the back. "Coffee soon? Miss our brainstorms, S." Celeste held the card in her hand for a long time, her heart thudding against her ribs, her mind swirling with questions. She didn't confront him yet. Instead, she tucked the card into her journal, a place where suspicions could sit quietly while she observed the unfolding storm. As if orchestrated by fate, Celeste met someone that week who would soon become pivotal. While volunteering part-time at the neighborhood adult literacy center, she was introduced to Margot Reyes, a lively, sharp-witted volunteer with a personality like wildfire and zero patience for dishonesty. Margot was a single woman in her late 30s, a financial analyst by profession, but volunteered to escape the soullessness of spreadsheets and boardrooms. She noticed Celeste's quietness immediately. "You've got kind eyes, but tired ones. Your husband stressing you out?" Margot asked bluntly one day. Celeste laughed nervously but said nothing. Over time, they grew closer, often grabbing coffee after workshops. It was during one of those late afternoon lattes that Margot said something that stuck. "Some men aren't cheaters in the physical sense, but they disappear emotionally, and that's worse. It's like being ghosted while someone still sleeps beside you." Celeste felt her breath hitch. It was the first time someone had put her ache into words. She didn't know it yet, but Margot's voice, fierce and loyal, would soon become her anchor. And somewhere across the city that very night, Sloan Keller stepped into a black town car outside Landon's building, her lips curled in a knowing smile, carrying with her a plan she had been waiting years to execute. It was a Tuesday evening when Celeste first noticed the scent, subtle, exotic, and wholly unfamiliar. Landon had just come in from what he claimed was an impromptu investor dinner and walked past her to the kitchen island, loosening his tie and kissing her cheek. That kiss, once warm and reassuring, now felt mechanical, like a habit without sentiment. As she leaned in, the fragrance on his collar, something musky with a floral undertone, stopped her cold. It wasn't the department store brand he typically wore. No, this had layers, feminine notes, perfume laced into the threads of his white shirt. Celeste didn't ask him about it directly. She simply excused herself to the bedroom and sat in the dark for several minutes, her fingers gripping the edge of the bed. When he joined her minutes later, she forced a smile, asked about his night, and nodded along as he talked vaguely about funding rounds and team expansions. But even as he spoke, her mind wasn't with his words, it was tracing the scent that still lingered on his shirt, weaving itself into the fabric of doubt. The following day, Celeste called Margot and asked to meet for lunch, something she rarely did midweek. They sat at a sidewalk cafe as the autumn breeze teased napkins and turned leaves to gold around them. Margot didn't need a full explanation. "It's happening, isn't it?" she asked gently. Celeste nodded but hesitated. "I don't have proof. It's just off. His smell. His eyes. The way he disappears even when he's home." Margot listened without judgment, then leaned in. "You don't need lipstick on a collar to know when your man's heart is stepping out. Trust your gut, girl." That afternoon, Celeste returned home and opened the dry cleaning bag Landon had tossed aside in the hallway. She hadn't intended to snoop, or maybe she had, but hadn't admitted it to herself. Inside was the same white shirt from the night before, and as she pressed the fabric to her nose, the scent overwhelmed her again. She reached for the garment tag and found something wedged beneath it, a folded receipt from an upscale lounge across town. He hadn't mentioned that location. She took a picture and placed everything back carefully, then sat at the window watching dusk fall, the city lights flickering on one by one, each one a reminder of how far away Landon had drifted. By the end of the week, Landon missed her scheduled medical appointment, one she had reminded him about twice, concerning recurring dizzy spells that had recently begun troubling her. She sat in the waiting room alone, surrounded by anxious mothers, retirees, and buzzing children, each one accompanied by someone who showed up. The doctor mentioned stress, tension, lack of rest, all symptoms of someone carrying silent burdens. Celeste didn't argue. She smiled politely, took her prescription, and left quietly. When she returned home that evening, Landon was already there, lounging on the couch with a tumbler of whiskey and a blank look in his eyes. She told him how the appointment went. "Right," he muttered, barely glancing up. "Sorry I missed it. Things have been insane." Celeste stood there for a moment, holding her bag in one hand, watching him sink deeper into his silence. That night, she wrote in her journal, "I'm learning to mourn someone who still sleeps beside me." And far across the city, in a private rooftop bar, Sloan Keller sipped a Manhattan and laughed quietly with a mutual colleague, murmuring, "You have no idea how easy he is to unravel." When the invitation to the Belridge Winter Gala arrived in the mail, embossed in gold foil, sealed with a navy wax stamp, Celeste blinked twice, almost disbelieving it was addressed to her. "Mr. and Mrs. Landon Whitaker," it read, "cordially invited to an exclusive evening of celebration, elegance, and recognition." It felt out of place, considering the emotional distance that had settled in their home like fog. She held the card up to the sunlight, wondering if it was some form of apology or olive branch. That evening, Landon confirmed it nonchalantly while fixing a drink. "Yeah, big annual thing. Show up, shake hands, smile. You should come," he said, not even looking up. For a brief moment, Celeste saw a flicker of possibility. Maybe this was an opportunity to reclaim something. A chance to be seen, not just by the corporate crowd, but by the man she married. When she asked if she could wear something elegant, not just for herself, but for them, Landon shrugged, "Sure. Just don't overthink it. It's not the Oscars." She smiled anyway, clinging to the rare moment he even acknowledged her presence with a shared plan. Hope, foolish, fragile, persistent, began to stir again. Celeste called Ava the next morning, her voice lighter than it had been in weeks. "It's a gala," she said excitedly, like something out of a movie. Ava was immediately supportive, offering to fly into Seattle for the weekend to help her prepare. "We're pulling you out of that slump," Ava declared. "You're going to remind everyone, especially your husband, who you are." They spent Saturday scouring boutiques, sipping vanilla chai lattes in between fittings, until they found the perfect gown, a backless, floor-length black silk dress with a side slit and gentle shimmer under soft light. Margot, who met them later that day for lunch, whistled when she saw Celeste. "Now that's how you enter a room," she said, snapping a picture for memory's sake. Celeste beamed, for the first time in months, feeling like she had an anchor of support beneath her. She booked a salon appointment, practiced soft makeup looks in the mirror, and even bought a pair of satin gloves to complete the outfit. The old Celeste, the one who loved to feel beautiful without apology, peeked out again. That night, she journaled, "This might be the night everything turns around." But what she didn't know was that elsewhere in the city, another woman was preparing for the same gala. And for her, the event wasn't about celebration. It was about conquest. In an upscale showroom on the north side of Seattle, Sloane Keller stood in front of a triple mirror, slipping into a black silk gown with nearly identical details, backless, slit at the thigh, shimmering under the chandelier lights. Her stylist clapped approvingly, "You'll own the room." Sloane smiled, her eyes sharp, calculating. "I plan to." While the boutique clerk folded her coat, Sloane checked her phone. A message from Landon blinked across the screen. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. I'll find a way to slip away early." She smirked and deleted the message instantly. Sloane had never been one for public dramatics, but she understood the value of silent sabotage. She wasn't coming to play fair, she was coming to remind Landon of everything he once had with her: excitement, ambition, danger. She knew Celeste would be there, she made sure of it. Back at the Whitaker apartment, Celeste hummed softly while steaming her gown, believing that maybe, just maybe, this night would bring her and Landon back together. She didn't know the battlefield she was about to walk into was already set, with her heart, her dignity, and her marriage hanging in the balance. The lobby of the Bellevue Grand Hotel sparkled like a diamond-studded dream, chandeliers cascading above sleek marble floors, strings of violins filling the air with elegance, and guests draped in tailored tuxedos and designer gowns. Celeste arrived alone, stepping out of her rideshare with a nervous but determined grace, the long slit of her silk gown catching the wind just enough to draw a few admiring glances. She'd spent over an hour perfecting her look, from the delicate pearl pins in her swept-up hair to the velvet clutch that trembled slightly in her hand. As she crossed the threshold, she scanned the room instinctively for Landon, her pulse ticking like a metronome. She spotted Graham first, standing near the bar in conversation with a tall brunette. He nodded politely at Celeste, but his eyes flickered, confusion or concern, she couldn't tell. Then she saw Landon across the ballroom. But her breath caught. He wasn't alone. On his arm was a woman in a gown strikingly, almost mockingly, identical to hers, backless, black silk, slit rising mid-thigh. Sloane Keller turned slightly as if summoned by Celeste's gaze, and the moment their eyes met, her smile curled with deliberate cruelty. Celeste's feet faltered for a split second, but she forced herself forward. She wouldn't retreat. Not now. Not in front of these people. She glided across the floor, heels clicking with practiced confidence, even though her heart was a mess of glass shards rattling in her chest. Landon turned, finally noticing her, his expression unreadable. Surprise? Guilt? Nothing at all? "You made it," he said, voice stiff. "Didn't think you'd come this early." Sloane offered a coy glance, her arm still threaded possessively through his. "You look beautiful, Celeste." "What a coincidence." "Same taste and style," she said sweetly, tilting her head. Celeste's lips parted to respond, but her throat felt too tight. "How convenient," she replied softly, holding back the tremble. The three stood there for a moment, a distorted triangle of tension in a room full of laughter. Then, to her disbelief, Landon leaned over and whispered something to Sloane, and moments later, guided her onto the dance floor without another word. Celeste stood frozen, blinking, breath short, watching as her husband placed his hand on another woman's back, the part of her body that should have only known his touch tonight, and began to dance. The violin sang louder, strings aching in ironic harmony with Celeste's internal shattering. Guests clapped politely, some glancing over with puzzled amusement, others too self-absorbed to notice the woman in black standing alone near the center aisle. Graham made his way toward her, his brow furrowed. "Celeste," he began, but she held up a hand. She didn't want pity. Not now. Not ever. She turned sharply, heading toward the terrace just beyond the ballroom, the night air biting against her exposed skin. The city lights stretched below like stars spilled across concrete, and for a moment she leaned against the balcony, trying to breathe. Her phone buzzed in her clutch, a message from Ava, "Send pictures." "You must look incredible." Celeste couldn't bring herself to reply. Instead, she stared at her reflection in the glass, flawless makeup, shimmering gown, pearl hairpins, a portrait of composure. And yet inside, she was drowning. Somewhere beyond the ballroom doors, her husband spun another woman beneath golden lights while strangers applauded. Tonight was supposed to be magic. Instead, it was a slow, calculated humiliation, and the worst part? She hadn't even reached the bottom yet. The ride home from the gala was silent. Celeste sat rigid in the passenger seat of Landon's black BMW, her hands folded tightly over her lap, fingers digging into her clutch until the satin wrinkled. The only sound was the quiet hum of tires on wet asphalt and the occasional click of the turning signal. Landon, who had barely acknowledged her on the dance floor, kept his eyes forward, jaw tense. Celeste had waited, through the entire event, for an explanation, a gesture, a reason, anything. It never came. When they pulled into the underground garage of their building, she waited for him to speak as the engine died. He didn't. "You danced with her," she finally said, voice soft but searing. "In front of everyone. You left me standing there. In the same dress." Landon sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Celeste, don't start." That response was gasoline on a growing fire. "Don't start," she echoed. "You paraded your ex through a ballroom like she belonged beside you, and I'm not supposed to react?" The elevator ride up was suffocating, the air thick with everything unsaid, and everything exploding. By the time they entered the apartment, the argument was inevitable. Celeste threw her clutch onto the console and turned sharply toward him. "Do you know how humiliated I felt? How cruel it was to let her wear the same dress and pretend it was a coincidence. That wasn't an accident, Landon. That was planned." Landon dropped his keys, then turned with an expression Celeste hadn't seen before, cold, dismissive, sharp. "Not everything's about you, Celeste. God, you're just so insensitive and overdramatic sometimes." The word sliced. Celeste blinked, stunned. "Insensitive," she repeated, her voice cracking. "I was alone all night while my husband flaunted a woman he once dated, in front of colleagues, friends, investors, and I'm the one being dramatic?" Landon threw his blazer onto the couch, walking past her. "She's part of the company, Celeste. I wasn't going to make a scene over a damn dress." Her voice rose now, unfiltered anguish spilling out. "You didn't make a scene, Landon, you made a choice. And it wasn't me." He stopped at the kitchen, grabbed a water bottle, took a long swig, and said nothing. His silence spoke louder than any defense could. Celeste stormed into the bedroom, yanked off her earrings, and stared at her reflection in the mirror. Mascara smudged beneath her eyes, hair falling out of its perfect pins, shoulders trembling. She looked like a stranger. Ava's texts were still lighting up her phone, asking for photos, for details, assuming it was a fairy tale. She placed the phone face down, unable to lie to anyone, not even by omission. When Landon walked into the room minutes later, she didn't look up. "You broke something tonight," she whispered. "Maybe it was already cracked. Maybe I just didn't want to see it." Landon leaned against the doorframe, still saying nothing. And that, too, was an answer. That night, they slept on opposite ends of the bed, with miles of pain and silence between them. Celeste curled beneath the blanket, tears sliding into the pillowcase, the memory of Sloane's smug smile replaying in her mind. In the darkness, she thought of all the times she had swallowed doubt, chosen peace, and silenced herself. But this time, she wasn't sure silence would save them. In fact, it might be the thing that ended it all. Celeste didn't wake up to the sound of birds or the aroma of coffee like she used to. She woke to silence, raw, stretched silence that echoed through every room like a warning bell. Landon had already left. No note. No text. Just a cold imprint on the bed and the faint scent of his cologne on the pillow beside her. She sat upright slowly, the events of the previous night crashing into her like a wave. Her phone buzzed with missed calls from Ava and a message from Margot. I heard about the gala. You okay? Celeste stared at the screen, debating whether honesty would feel like healing or like bleeding in public. She typed a reply and deleted it 3 times before sending a simple, not really. For the first time, she felt something fragile inside her fracture, not a shatter, but a splintering. She looked around the condo, the perfectly decorated walls, the clean marble floors, the expensive but joyless kitchen. This wasn't a home anymore. It was a museum curated by a man who no longer looked at her with softness. That afternoon, Ava arrived unannounced. She stepped into the apartment and immediately noticed the tension hanging like smoke. Where is he? She asked. Work, Celeste replied, her voice dry. Ava sat beside her sister on the couch and held her hand without needing any explanation. You know you don't have to stay, right? Celeste shook her head. I don't want to run just because things are hard. Ava's voice was gentle but firm. This isn't hard. It's cruel. Celeste told her everything, the dress, the dance, the insult. She left nothing out. For the first time in weeks, she spoke without filtering herself, and each word made her feel simultaneously stronger and more broken. Ava's expression darkened. He doesn't get to do this and walk away like nothing happened. As Ava helped her pack an overnight bag, Celeste felt a strange weight lift from her chest, like she was finally choosing herself. They booked a hotel across town. She left a note on the nightstand that read, I needed to breathe. We'll talk when there's something worth saving. Then she closed the door behind her, not just to the apartment, but to the version of herself who waited quietly for a man to change. Meanwhile, Landon returned that night to find the place dim and still. At first, he assumed Celeste had gone to bed early, but as he moved from room to room, the absence became obvious. No shoes by the door, no tea mug in the sink, no subtle music playing from her speaker. Then he saw the note. He read it 3 times before folding it into his palm, standing in the middle of the living room with his jaw clenched. He didn't call her. He didn't go after her. Instead, he poured himself a drink and called someone else, Sloane. She left, he said simply. On the other end, Sloane paused. Did she say where she was going? Landon hesitated. No. But she'll be back. She always comes back. Sloane laughed softly. You sure about that? Landon didn't answer. Instead, he stood by the window, staring at the skyline, suddenly unsure if he was watching the city. Or watching his marriage disappear into it. And just beneath that uncertainty was a deeper truth, the kind that rattled in the silence. Something had cracked. And cracks, when ignored too long, always find their way to the surface. The hotel room Ava booked was modest but warm, tucked inside a boutique inn on the quieter side of Seattle's Capitol Hill. Celeste didn't unpack. Instead, she sat by the window each evening, wrapped in a thick throw blanket, watching strangers move through their lives like they belonged to them, purposeful, present. She envied them. Days passed, and still, Landon didn't call. The silence confirmed what her heart feared but her pride needed. He didn't care enough to chase. Ava checked in daily between work and motherhood, and it was during one of their lunch visits that she said something Celeste hadn't expected. You need help. Not just with him, with everything. You've poured so much of yourself into this marriage that you've forgotten who you were before it. Those words sat heavy in Celeste's chest. That night, she searched for therapists nearby and landed on one with a calm presence and excellent reviews, Dr. Eden Jensen, a licensed counselor specializing in trauma and emotional fatigue. The next morning, she booked her first session, not because she was ready, but because she couldn't afford to keep unraveling alone. Dr. Jensen's office was filled with soft light and quiet neutrality, bookshelves of non-intimidating titles, pastel artwork, and a subtle scent of sandalwood. Celeste didn't speak much during the first session. But the silence was different this time, not suffocating, but patient. Dr. Jensen didn't push. Instead, she asked simple questions, planting seeds of reflection. When was the last time you felt safe? Celeste blinked, and tears slipped down without warning. In the sessions that followed, Celeste spoke more freely about her childhood, about watching her mother lose herself trying to keep a man who had already emotionally left, about the way she'd mirrored that pattern without even realizing it. She began to understand that emotional abandonment was its own kind of abuse, silent, creeping, and devastating. She started journaling again, not to track pain, but to rediscover her own thoughts. One entry read, "I am not responsible for the absence in others, but I am responsible for protecting what's left of me." With each session, she peeled off layers of herself she had buried to please Landon. And with every layer uncovered, she realized she was still there. Beneath the hurt, beneath the humiliation, Celeste Monroe still existed. Meanwhile, Landon's world was shifting in subtler ways. At Belridge, he threw himself harder into work, closing 2 major contracts in 10 days and earning praise from the board. But his victories felt hollow. Sloane was now a regular presence, effortlessly weaving herself into meetings, casual drinks, client strategy sessions. She began referring to him as her partner in progress, a line she used often in front of others, planting ideas she hoped would bloom. Landon didn't stop her. He let the boundaries blur, privately justifying it as a coping mechanism. What he didn't see was how quickly Sloane was rebuilding control, not with seduction this time, but with influence. Graham noticed. "You're playing with fire," he warned during a tense elevator ride. "She ruined you once. Don't forget that." But Landon shrugged it off. "I'm not the same guy." Graham stepped out at his floor and turned back. "No. You're worse. Because this time, you know better." But Landon didn't listen. And far from his corner office, in that cozy therapy room, Celeste was finally beginning to listen to herself, and for the first time in a long while, she liked what she was hearing. It was Graham's idea, a double dinner, casual and unthreatening. He called Celeste himself, speaking with a tone far softer than usual. "It's just dinner," he assured her. "Neutral ground. I figured if there's any chance of salvaging something, someone's got to throw a rope." At first, Celeste was hesitant. The idea of sitting across from Landon again, sharing a table, pretending things were remotely normal, sent a flicker of anxiety through her chest. But something about Graham's sincerity, and the fact that he'd gone out of his way to include her, made her agree. She chose a navy blue dress, simple but dignified, and arrived 10 minutes early to the Orchard House, a stylish bistro tucked near the harbor. Graham and his date, a quiet, intelligent woman named Dana Collier, were already seated. Dana greeted Celeste warmly, offering small talk that helped ease the tension. Then the door opened, and Landon walked in. But he wasn't alone. Sloane Keller trailed behind him, laughing at something he said, her hand briefly resting on his back as they were led to the table. The air thinned. Celeste blinked, stunned. She hadn't expected this. Graham's eyes widened. "She wasn't invited," he muttered, but it was too late. The trap had already sprung. They sat, the table now a strained hexagon of feigned smiles and unspoken tension. Landon acted as if nothing was wrong, leaning back casually, ordering a bottle of wine, making jokes as if they were all old friends reuniting. Sloane played her part flawlessly, never overt, but subtly provocative. "I didn't know Celeste would be here," she said, eyes glinting. "But I'm glad. It's nice to see there's no bad blood. It's so healthy when couples stay civil." Celeste bit down on her lip to stop herself from reacting. Graham shot her an apologetic glance, visibly uncomfortable. Dana, sensing the shift, tried to change the subject, but the damage had already begun to seep in like slow poison. As entrees arrived, Sloane leaned toward Landon, whispering something that made him laugh, not loudly, but enough for Celeste to hear. She felt her hand tremble slightly around her fork. This wasn't dinner, it was theater, and she had been cast in the role of the discarded wife, seated across from the woman who was slowly taking her place, inch by mocking inch. What made it worse was Landon's complete ease with it all, as though her pain was irrelevant. Midway through the meal, Sloane turned to Celeste with mock curiosity. "So, still teaching?" she asked, dabbing her lips with a cloth napkin. The question, posed innocently, was laced with condescension. Celeste looked up, her voice calm but cold. "Actually, I'm between positions. Took some time to focus on healing. You should try it sometime." Graham coughed to cover a laugh, while Dana's eyes widened. Sloane's smile faltered briefly, but she recovered. Landon, instead of diffusing the moment, looked at Celeste and said, "You didn't have to be rude." She was just making conversation. The words felt like a slap. Celeste rose quietly from her seat, setting her napkin down with grace. "Excuse me," she said to Dana and Graham, ignoring the others. "Thank you for dinner." And with that, she walked out, no tears, no breakdown, just dignity in motion. Outside, the night air greeted her like a sigh of relief. She stood on the sidewalk for a long time, looking up at the stars. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel broken. She felt done. Celeste returned to the hotel in silence. She didn't cry. The tears had dried somewhere between the restaurant and the cold walk back through the city's glass towers. Instead, she stepped into her room, undressed slowly, and stood in front of the bathroom mirror wrapped in nothing but stillness. Her reflection startled her, not because she looked broken, but because she didn't recognize herself at all. The woman staring back had tired eyes, but they no longer begged for understanding. Her spine was straighter. Her jaw clenched. She wasn't defeated, just done pretending. She ran her fingers down her collarbone, tracing the hollow space where hope used to rest. What had she become? Not weak. Not naive. Just someone who'd held on too long, believing love was enough to glue cracked hearts back together. But now, there were no more illusions. Just facts. Her marriage was unraveling, her husband was no longer hers, and the woman she used to be had vanished. In her place stood someone Celeste hadn't met yet, someone with nothing left to lose. The next morning, she found herself pacing outside a boxing studio she had passed dozens of times but never entered. Something about it, the sound of gloves hitting leather, the scent of sweat and resolve, drew her in like gravity. She stood at the door, staring through the glass until a tall man with a trimmed beard, olive skin, and observant eyes opened it. "You lost?" he asked, voice low and calm. "Not anymore," Celeste replied. His name was Jonas Rivers, a former pro boxer turned trainer who ran women-only self-defense and fitness classes. He didn't ask questions, didn't demand her story. He simply handed her gloves and said, "You'll hate it before you love it." Celeste spent the first 10 minutes struggling, awkward punches, shaky stances, heavy breathing. But somewhere between jabs and sweat, she began releasing everything, the humiliation, the silence, the betrayal. Jonas corrected her posture, not with force, but with quiet encouragement. "You've got more in you," he said during a final round. And she did. With each hit, Celeste wasn't fighting Landon or Sloane, she was fighting the part of herself that once believed staying silent was strength. By the end of the session, her arms ached, her lungs burned, and her chest felt lighter than it had in weeks. That evening, she stared into the mirror again, bruised but glowing from the exertion, her skin flushed, her hair damp with sweat. And this time, she recognized herself. There was no designer dress, no Galleretti poise, just a woman with grit in her jaw and fire in her eyes. Jonas had invited her to join the weekly rotation, and she agreed without hesitation. That same night, Ava dropped by with takeout, and for the first time in weeks, Celeste laughed, not politely, but with full-bodied joy that came from inside, not performance. "I don't know what you're doing," Ava said between bites of sesame chicken, "but whatever it is, don't stop." Celeste smiled, wiping sauce from her cheek. "I'm not trying to survive anymore," she whispered. "I'm trying to remember who I was before I ever needed him." And in that moment, something shifted. The mirror no longer showed a stranger, it showed a woman rising, quietly and steadily, from the ashes of everything that tried to burn her down. Celeste never intended to go through Landon's financial documents, not out of fear, but because trust had once been her default setting. But things had changed. The woman in the mirror now asked questions. It began with an overdue notification on their joint bank account, something she'd rarely seen in their well-curated life. Curious and cautious, she logged in to check the transaction history. What she found chilled her: large, recurring withdrawals marked vaguely as consulting expenses and corporate discretion fees. Some were small enough to be overlooked, others were substantial. One transfer, $15,000, had been routed to a separate bank account under a different name. She copied the details and began cross-checking through old financial statements, invoices, and emails. Hours passed. Her hands trembled as she uncovered more documents tying that account to a private estate trust registered under SK Holdings. SK Sloan Keller. Her chest tightened. This wasn't just emotional betrayal anymore. It was financial infidelity, concealed with spreadsheets and silence. The man she had once built a future with had begun building an escape plan without her even realizing it. Celeste didn't confront Landon right away. Instead, she sought clarity, legal and emotional. She scheduled a meeting with a financial attorney referred by Margot, a meticulous woman named Rachel Brenner, who had a reputation for protecting women blindsided in high-income marriages. Rachel was sharp and precise, guiding Celeste through the process of safeguarding her assets. "You've done the hard part," Rachel said, tapping the papers. "You opened your eyes. Now you get to protect what's yours before someone else claims it." Celeste felt a flicker of control returning. She changed passwords, locked her personal savings, and began pulling documents that traced back 5 years, every asset, signature, and transfer. She even checked the deed of their Seattle condo. To her astonishment, it had recently been refinanced, signed without her consent. The realization knocked the breath from her lungs. This wasn't impulsive. Landon had been preparing this for months, maybe longer. And yet every night, he had kissed her forehead like nothing was unraveling behind the scenes. She left Rachel's office not in tears, but in steel. Landon had taken her trust and turned it into leverage. But she would not let him walk away with her silence, too. Back at Belridge, Landon was too consumed with the praise of his latest merger to notice that the walls were slowly closing in. Sloan had slithered her way into every crevice of his professional life, pitching herself as indispensable, helping him court investors, manage optics, even land a potential expansion deal in Texas. He let her take the reins in ways he'd once sworn he'd never do again. Graham had officially resigned the week prior, refusing to be complicit. "I know what this is, Landon," he said before walking out. "You're not building an empire. You're lighting a funeral pyre and calling it strategy." Landon brushed off the warning, assuring himself that everything was under control. But deep down, cracks had begun to form in his confidence. Sloan had started making demands, requesting bigger cuts, private meetings, and subtly edging Celeste out of conversations entirely. Still, Landon believed he was managing it all. What he didn't know was that while he was weaving lies at work, Celeste was quietly stacking evidence, document by document, name by name, and preparing not to fight for him, but to fight against him. And once she was ready, he wouldn't even see the strike coming. Celeste wasn't prepared for how the truth would find her. It wasn't through a confrontation, a confession, or even a private admission. It came instead from a photograph, a glossy, filtered image sent to her by Margot at exactly 7:14 p.m. The message read simply, "You need to see this before it goes viral." The image was from a tech investors gala hosted in Portland, a high-profile affair Celeste had once attended with Landon in happier days. This year, however, she hadn't been invited. But Landon had gone, arm in arm with Sloan. In the image, he stood with his hand firmly on the small of Sloan's back, both of them dressed to perfection and caught mid-laughter beneath the Belridge banner. There was no room for denial, no way to interpret the photo as a work-related coincidence. This was public. This was intentional. It was a declaration, not just to her, but to the world. Landon hadn't merely stepped out of their marriage, he had closed the door behind him and smiled for the cameras while doing it. The image exploded across local news circuits, social media pages, and corporate investor threads. Whitaker and Keller, Seattle's power pair, one headline touted. It didn't take long for Ava to call, her voice sharp with rage. He's not even hiding it anymore. Celeste didn't cry. She didn't scream. She sat in her hotel room, staring at the image as if it were a eulogy to the life she had once believed in. A cold calm swept over her. All the signs, the missed calls, the perfume, the financial lies, they were chapters, and this photo was the epilogue. It no longer mattered what Landon had to say. She had heard enough from his silence, his choices, and now, his public performance. That same night, she contacted Rachel Brenner and told her she was ready to proceed with filing. "We're not negotiating dignity," she said. "I want everything I'm owed, and then I want to disappear from his narrative entirely." Rachel didn't hesitate. The legal process began, swift and surgical. What Landon didn't know was that while he paraded his betrayal as power, Celeste was orchestrating her exit like a strategist, quietly, thoroughly, and without sentiment. When the initial divorce papers were served to Landon's office the following week, he was stunned, not by the filing itself, but by the precision. Every account, every asset, every breach had been listed in clean legal language, leaving no room for manipulation. His assistant, caught off guard by the sudden shift in tone, asked if he wanted to call Celeste. He didn't answer. That evening, when he finally did try to reach her, his call went straight to voicemail. She had blocked him. For the first time, he felt the chill of consequence wrap around his ego. Sloane noticed. "You okay?" she asked, swirling wine in her glass as they lounged in his penthouse. Landon nodded, but the nod lacked conviction. He suddenly remembered the way Celeste used to organize their life with invisible threads, always one step ahead, always keeping things intact. And now, with one firm stroke of a pen, she had severed those threads. The home they'd built? Transferred into litigation. Their savings? Frozen. His image? Now under scrutiny by shareholders who were uncomfortable with scandal. He had underestimated her. And in doing so, he had lit the match that burned down everything he once claimed to love. The storage box had lived untouched at the bottom of Celeste's closet for years, even before Seattle, before the wedding, before Landon's betrayals began. It was a collection of handwritten letters, bound in pale blue ribbon, written in her neat cursive on creamy stationery. Each one was dated, each addressed, "To myself." They weren't journal entries. They were more intimate, snapshots of her thoughts, hopes, and fears written at pivotal moments in her relationship with Landon. She discovered them while packing the last of her things from the apartment. The legal papers had gone through, and the condo was no longer hers. That afternoon, alone in a temporary suite, she untied the ribbon and began to read. The first letter was written 2 weeks after their engagement, titled "Don't Ignore the Silence." In it, she wrote about how Landon had dismissed her concerns over a phone call he received at midnight, how she had chosen to believe his vague explanation. The next, dated 6 months into their marriage, described how she sometimes felt invisible when they were out with his colleagues, how she always had to initiate affection. With every letter, a pattern unraveled, not of a man who changed, but of a woman who silenced herself piece by piece to keep love afloat. By the time she reached the final letter, written just before the Portland Gala, Celeste was weeping, not from heartbreak, but from recognition. She saw how she had used love as a shield, hoping her patience would transform Landon into the man he never really was. But more strikingly, she realized how often she had sensed the truth and talked herself out of it. She had excused, rationalized, and shrunk herself, all in the name of loyalty. The final paragraph of the last letter read, "If he ever makes you feel like your emotions are too much, that your pain is an inconvenience, walk away. Don't defend your worth to someone who weaponizes your heart against you." Celeste folded the paper slowly, her tears soft but steady. She looked around the quiet room, filled with boxes, packed belongings, and an eerie kind of peace. She gathered every letter and placed them into the fireplace, lit a single match, and watched them burn. Not in anger. Not in bitterness. but as a ritual, a farewell to the woman who had once needed permission to feel. The woman she had outgrown. Later that evening, as the fire cooled and the sky turned navy beyond the windows, Celeste brewed a cup of herbal tea and opened her journal, the new one she started after moving out. It had only one entry so far, but tonight, she felt ready to write again. She scribbled slowly, deliberately. I thought closure would come from confrontation. It didn't. It came from clarity. She paused, then wrote another line. This is not a heartbreak story. This is a liberation story. As she closed the journal, a quiet knock echoed from the hallway. It was Margot, holding a bottle of sparkling juice and a sly smile. Thought we could toast to freedom, she said. They clinked glasses as Celeste let out a laugh, short, real, and bright. There were no grand declarations, no dramatic flashbacks. Just two women, sitting on the floor of a room no longer haunted by unspoken apologies. The past had finally released her. And in its absence, Celeste felt something else begin to bloom, space. Space for peace, for reinvention, and perhaps one day, for love that didn't ask her to disappear. Celeste was halfway through her Monday morning routine, gym, green smoothie, a quick check-in with Rachel about the final division of assets, when her phone buzzed with a message from Margot. You're not going to believe this. Check your email. Curious, Celeste opened her inbox and found a forwarded press release from a popular Seattle lifestyle blog. Inside the Whitaker legacy, a new chapter begins, exclusive. She opened the link, and there it was, a headline in bold, Landon Whitaker expecting first child with business partner, Sloan Keller. The article featured images from the Portland Gala, now repurposed with captions like parents-to-be spotted glowing with joy. Celeste's fingers went cold. It wasn't the pregnancy that stunned her, it was the public audacity. Her name wasn't mentioned anywhere. It was as if she had never existed. She felt her heart flutter with something unrecognizable, not sadness, but an eerie clarity. The man she once loved had just erased her in full daylight. But something about the timeline felt off. Later that day, Celeste stopped by Rachel's office to sign the final financial release forms. As Rachel reviewed the documentation, she raised an eyebrow. Did you see the news? Celeste nodded. I did. Rachel clicked her tongue. Funny thing is, the last joint account withdrawal Landon made was on the same day you both signed the legal separation. He moved $7,000 to cover a medical lab in Fremont. That's not a prenatal clinic. That's a paternity testing lab. Celeste's eyes widened. Wait. What? Rachel leaned in. He requested a DNA test on Sloan's pregnancy 2 weeks before she even made it public. My contact at the financial registry said the transaction was flagged for audit because it didn't match standard vendor codes. Celeste blinked, trying to connect the dots. So, he doesn't know? Rachel shook her head. Oh, he knows. He just hasn't decided what to do with it yet, or how to spin it. Celeste sat back, heart pounding, the pieces beginning to form a picture far more sinister than she anticipated. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was a lie upon a lie, and someone was using a pregnancy to cement their grip on a crumbling empire. Determined to find the truth herself, Celeste reached out to Jonas, not because he had the answers, but because he had something more valuable, connections. Jonas had once trained a woman named Dr. Lainey Rhodes, a fertility specialist who now worked at a private clinic in Bellevue, the same clinic Sloan had visited weeks before her announcement. Celeste met Lainey under the pretense of interest in a wellness referral but gently shifted the conversation. Lainey, careful not to violate privacy, didn't disclose anything directly, but her expression when Celeste mentioned Sloan's name was telling. Women come here for all kinds of reasons, Lainey said carefully. But pregnancy isn't always one of them. Sometimes they come to look like they're expecting before they ever are. That night, Celeste drove home in silence, the lights of the city smearing across her windshield like distorted stars. One thought throbbed in her chest: Sloan might not be pregnant, and if she was, Landon might not be the father. Either way, the empire they were parading was built on another illusion. And Celeste, though no longer part of it, now held the power to expose it all. It was Ava who saw them, purely by accident, or perhaps fate playing its hand. She had been in downtown Vancouver for a legal mediation seminar and stopped at the Clarion Hotel rooftop bar for a late evening tea. That's when she spotted them, Sloane Keller in a crimson silk dress, laughing as she leaned in close to a sharply dressed man with salt and pepper hair and a wedding band that gleamed under the string lights. Ava blinked, instinctively reaching for her phone. She zoomed in discreetly and snapped several photos. The man wasn't Landon. A quick Google image search later confirmed it: Damon Wills, a married tech investor and one of Belridge's quiet board backers. Ava didn't hesitate. She emailed the photos to Celeste with the subject line, "It's worse than you thought." Moments later, her phone rang. Celeste's voice was low and even. "She's not pregnant, Ava. I'm sure of it now. She's playing both of them." Ava didn't ask how she knew, she just believed her. And for the first time, the game Sloane was playing became terrifyingly clear. She wasn't just entangled in Landon's life, she was leveraging him. And Landon, blinded by ego and guilt, didn't even see the noose tightening around his neck. Celeste acted quickly. She compiled every piece of evidence she had: the financial records, the timeline inconsistencies, the photos from Ava, and even a private witness statement from Jonas confirming that Sloane's visits to Dr. Rhodes's clinic had nothing to do with fertility treatment. She didn't send them to Landon. Not yet. Instead, she sent a confidential packet to Wells and Kinley, the law firm overseeing Belridge's board affairs and investment ethics. With a subject line marked urgent, potential executive misconduct, she ensured the information would reach the right eyes. By the next morning, 3 members of the board had called an emergency session. Landon arrived late, unaware of the ambush. When the photos of Sloane and Damon were laid out in front of him, time-stamped and corroborated with financial overlaps, he went silent. "Do you have anything to say?" one board member asked. Landon stammered, claiming ignorance, but the damage had been done. Sloane's dual connections posed a conflict of interest that could cripple the company's credibility. More damningly, rumors swirled that Sloane had promised both men access to proprietary merger data, one for love, one for leverage. Celeste, from a distance, watched the empire unravel, not with glee, but with a strange calm. She had spent so long mourning a version of Landon that had never really existed. Now, all she felt was closure cloaked in vindication. Sloane, cornered, tried to spin control. She arranged a private meeting with Landon that evening, demanding he shut the scandal down. "Say it's fake. Say I'm being blackmailed. I'll handle Wills," she hissed. But Landon wasn't the same man she had wrapped around her finger months ago. He sat across from her in silence, eyes vacant, as she unraveled in front of him. "You used me," he muttered finally. "You played me to elevate yourself, and I let you." Sloane scoffed, rising from the table. "You think your wife didn't use you, too? Wake up. You were always just a platform for someone else's dream." She stormed out, heels clicking like gunshots across tile. Landon sat alone in the room, the silence suffocating. That night, he tried calling Celeste again. And again. No answer. He even messaged Ava, no reply. The world was growing quieter around him, but not the peaceful kind. It was the kind of silence that comes when your kingdom has fallen and no one is left to rebuild it for you. Meanwhile, in her own quiet corner of the city, Celeste smiled softly as she watched the final tower collapse, not because she enjoyed revenge, but because she had finally learned the difference between being vindicated and being free. The Belridge Annual Awards ceremony had always been the company's crown jewel, an opulent event filled with press, investors, and city elites dressed in champagne-toned ambition. Landon stood at the edge of the grand stage, waiting for his name to be called for the Visionary Leadership Award. Dressed in a tailored tuxedo, he looked every bit the Empire man, polished, poised, and practiced. But beneath the surface, sweat pooled at his collar, and his thoughts raced with the residue of Sloane's betrayal and the board's stern silence. Still, the public didn't know. Not yet. The press still hailed him as a comeback genius, a corporate phoenix. Then, just moments before the announcer stepped to the mic, a Bellridge assistant tapped him on the shoulder. "There's been a request to play a tribute video before your speech." It came from legal and board approval. Confused, Landon nodded. The lights dimmed. A soft piano score began. And then, it happened. On the towering screen behind him, a video file titled "Behind the Curtain," The Truth About Whitaker and Keller appeared, and the room fell into stunned silence. The footage wasn't loud or sensational, it was surgical. It opened with clips of Sloan and Damon Wills at multiple hotel locations, time-stamped and discreetly circled. Then came stills of confidential emails forwarded from Sloan's private server, her handwriting on investment drafts, and voice recordings from an anonymous source detailing her manipulation of both Damon and Landon. The video wasn't just evidence, it was an autopsy. With every frame, the audience's perception of Landon unraveled. His face, illuminated by the screen, turned ashen. Graham, seated in the front row, watched impassively, arms crossed. Rachel Brenner, positioned strategically beside board members, didn't blink. Finally, the video faded to black and left behind a single image, Celeste Monroe, standing in front of a courtroom building, silhouetted against the sky, with the words she chose truth over silence. The applause didn't come. The room stayed frozen in collective disbelief. Landon turned, his voice caught in his throat. The announcer, clearly rattled, stepped forward. "Mr. Whitaker, due to recent developments, the board has voted to postpone your acceptance speech and award review." Translation: it was over. Publicly. Permanently. Outside the venue, Celeste stood near a fountain lit in gold, a calm breeze brushing through her curls. She hadn't attended the ceremony, her presence wasn't needed. The truth had spoken for her. Ava approached with a grin and 2 takeaway lattes. "You sure you don't want to see his face?" she asked playfully. Celeste shook her head with a small smile. "I've already seen it. 100 times. Every time I was ignored. Every time I was lied to." She took a sip and exhaled deeply. "This is enough." Her phone buzzed. One new message, from Landon. She deleted it without opening. No words he could write now would ever rewrite what he had destroyed. Just then, Jonas pulled up in his truck, leaned out the window, and gave her a wink. "Ready?" She nodded. As she climbed in, Celeste glanced one last time at the glittering building behind her. It once represented everything she thought she wanted. Now, it was just a place where a man lost everything because he underestimated a woman who finally found her voice. She didn't look back again. 3 months after the public unveiling, Celeste stood beneath a bright spring sky in front of a red brick building nestled in a quiet Seattle neighborhood. The sign above the door read, "The Haven Collective, Emotional Wellness for Women Rebuilding." She hadn't planned to start anything. But survivors had begun emailing her after the exposure, women from corporate offices, homemakers, teachers, therapists, each with a story that mirrored her own in painful ways. It stirred something in Celeste, not just responsibility, but power. With help from Rachel, Jonas, and Margot, she created a safe community where no woman would ever feel invisible again. Inside, the lobby was filled with light, comfortable chairs, a coffee nook, and warm conversations. Jonas had helped renovate the space himself, painting the walls a soft sage green. And every Thursday, Celeste hosted a storytelling circle. It wasn't therapy, it was truth-telling, healing by reflection. This wasn't her comeback. This was her becoming, not built from rage, but from resurrection. Jonas parked his truck outside the building one evening, holding a bouquet of sunflowers and 2 bottles of elderflower soda. "They didn't have wine," he teased. "But I figured you'd toast with something that doesn't blur your mind." Celeste laughed, leaning against the doorway in a lavender blouse and jeans, barefoot and grounded. They had taken their time, no rush, no labels. Just quiet understanding, walks through the park, late-night drives filled with music instead of apologies. But something had shifted lately, something real, stable, not born from desperation but mutual restoration. Jonas stepped closer, brushing a curl from her cheek. "You still wear that necklace," he said, noticing the tiny compass pendant he'd gifted her after her first boxing showcase. "It reminds me I'm not lost anymore," she whispered. And in that moment, beneath a peach-colored sky, he kissed her, gently, without demand. She kissed him back, not because she needed rescuing, but because she didn't. It was the kind of kiss that doesn't rewrite the past, but makes peace with it. Elsewhere in the city, Landon watched her from a distance, not physically, but through headlines and whispers. He had lost his position at Belridge, resigned quietly before shareholders could vote him out. His reputation never recovered fully. Sloan had vanished overseas amid mounting legal inquiries. And though he tried to re-enter the industry under a new firm, the sting of scandal followed like perfume in a closed room. One evening, he scrolled past a photo of Celeste standing beside Jonas and a group of women at the Havens open house. She was smiling, not for cameras, not for show, but for herself. Landon stared for a long time, then closed the browser. There would be no redemption arc for him, no late-night apologies that made things right. Celeste hadn't just survived him. She had outgrown him. As for Celeste, she didn't need to know where Landon ended up. The chapter was closed. The story rewritten. And her new beginning was already beautifully underway. The end.